Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight on this lovely Friday evening in our webinar titled Discussing Malay Language and Literature Advocacy. The time is 7:56. We will let our viewers stream in and we'll be starting in about 5 minutes. This webinar is streamed on both Facebook and YouTube, so you can tune in to either one of these platforms to watch this stream, whichever you prefer. Thank you. It's currently 8:01 p.m. We'll be starting in 2 minutes. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for being here tonight at our webinar titled Discussing Malay Language and Literature Advocacy. This webinar is streamed on both Facebook and YouTube, so you can tune in to either one of these platforms to watch this stream. To give more context, this is the first installment in our new webinar series on advocacy that aims to look at advocacy practices in contemporary Singapore. This is a shift from our RIMA webinars previously that focused on Muslim diversity. If you are interested in those, you can read more from our briefs that accompany the webinars at rima.sg. With this new advocacy series, we aim to identify various forms of advocacy and analyze experiences of advocates in Singapore, as well as identify intended outcomes of these different causes. So we are in for an exciting future for this series, hopefully. And as you may have also noticed, before we begin, we'd like to belatedly preface that this session will be conducted in English to accommodate and reach our wider audience who may not speak the language fluently or at all. And perhaps we may also discover at the end of this series that the challenges and advocacy in the Malay language and literature scene is not unique to just the Malay speaking community. So then, comes the question, what is advocacy? This topic is not new. Looking into the Singaporean context alone, there has been much efforts and literature that discusses this national history of social change that would not have been possible without those advocating for it. Advocacy is also a word that has been closely associated with terms like activism or civil society. But what exactly do we mean by advocacy? And what does and what can advocacy look like? These are questions that we will be exploring in our series. But the general consensus on what advocacy is that it's defined as actions that persuade or shift attitudes through acts like recommending or supporting or defending. And this may, of course, look different across different causes. There's also this sentiment by CAPE SG, which is Community for Advocacy and Political Education, that we deeply resonated with and we wanted to emulate in this series, which is to extend this appreciation of advocacy in the Singaporean context by looking at strategies adopted by various groups, their challenges and achievements, and perhaps what different groups have in common. Most importantly, what we can learn from each other. And so we are kicking off this series with a discussion on Malay language and literature. I had the opportunity to attend a seminar 2 weekends ago that coincided with the last few days of Bulan Bahasa. This was organized by National Library Board, and this was titled Seminar Tokoh-Tokoh Melayu 2024, Seni Bahasa and Budaya, that brought to the fore a discussion on Malay pioneers in the arts, language and culture scene. While we're here, just a shout out to the NLB Malay Library Services Programs team who has been doing good work with their programs and workshops. Personally, I was very struck by the keynote speech by Miss Aidli Mospit, who listed whom she thought constituted Malay pioneers. And what I concluded from that is that the notion for advocates for the community can look very different according to different people who match these against different criteria. And in the Malay language and literature scene, at least, many of those who advocate for the community don't necessarily label themselves as advocates. They are first and foremost doing the work that they love and then sharing their knowledge and works with the world. The interpretation of advocacy then comes later when people like you and me put a name to these efforts of preservation or celebration or raising awareness about Malay language and literature. But before I go on any more tangents, let me get into the webinar itself. Tonight, we are joined by two stellar guests, Aisyah, Lyana, and Fadhli Fadzil. If you've been exposed to the Malay language and literature scene, these names would not be too unfamiliar to you. But if this is the first time that you're hearing about them, I'm excited for us to learn more from them. Both of them happen to be two of the three co-founders of an up-and-coming Malay writers collective called Major Chonting that aims to provide a safe space for young and new writers to experiment with their works. So how this webinar will go is that in the next hour or so, we'll be hearing more from our guest speakers on endeavours in the Malay language and Malay literature through their presentations each, and then we'll head off to a Q&A sessions where you will be able to send in your questions. In fact, the Slido will be available during their presentations if you have any questions at any point. And to formally introduce our first speaker, we have Fadhli Fadzil, who will be sharing more about advocacy efforts in the Malay language scene. Fadhli is a young writer short story category for Golden Point Award 2023, The Wilt in Malay, which honestly has a lesser ring to it than its Malay counterpart. He runs an Instagram page focused on Malay grammar, offering tips and insight to enhance the use of Malay language called Fadzil, which has been running for about 4 years now. I personally am a big fan of this page. Let us now invite Fadhli to the metaphorical stage to share with you more about the Malay language scene. Fadhli, please.
Advocacy, specifically. Hi everyone, I'm very excited to talk about advocacy, specifically in the Malay language realm. So, how it started, where we are now, and where we are heading. So, the struggle for the Malay language, or what I call perjuangan bahasa, is much more than just about keeping the language alive. I believe it's also about keeping our identity, our culture, and relevance. And this journey has definitely evolved over the years. So, like what our presenter has explained just now, the term advocacy might be a nuanced term when we talk about Malay language. It's not only about being vocal or directly fighting for the cause, but it's the active process of promoting and supporting a cause, idea, or issue at different levels, individual, community, and even systemic. And it involves a lot more indirect efforts. So when we talk about advocacy regarding the language and the literature realm, it is possibly also about the doing. Hence, when we discussed about Malay language and Malay literature, we have to acknowledge that there is this journey has evolved over the years, mainly due to the changing status of the language of the Malay language Bahasa Melayu in Singapore, the functions, the evolving challenges that have definitely garnered different and evolving responses by advocates through the efforts, through the stakeholders, and catering to different audience. So later, when we go through phase by phase, we will see that each phase have their own sets of challenges, and as such, have their own sets of efforts. So when Aisha and I were discussing about this topic, we actually realized a common trend about this evolving journey. We can classify this journey into three main phases, which is the preservation phase, the promotion phase, and lastly, which is now we are living in the evolution phase. So, if we would like to put a label to specific time frames, I would say in the Malay language realm, each phase, for example, for preservation, it I would see this more before Singapore became independent, pre-independence, where there was emerging dominance of English and colonial influence, and we would see the promotion phase um, in a very large time frame since independence and until recent 2000s, where English became more in demand due to their requirements for jobs and so on. So as such, in this era, there is a question about how relevant Bahasa Melayu is in the post-independence era. And currently, I would say that we are now 2010s until now, we are evolving in the evolution era where we have to be active and creative in thinking about how to sustain the interest amongst the youth towards the Bahasa Melayu. So let me just start with the first era, which is the preservation era. So in this era, before Singapore became independent, one of the main challenges was that Bahasa Melayu was not standardized yet, meaning that there were multiple spelling systems, there were regional variants, which made it difficult for the language to be taught, and it was also difficult to unify the different variants across the region. So that was where Zakba, our very well known and well respected linguist in the Malay language world, also in this era, um, there were also a dominance of English. So literary figures and literary groups such as Asas 50 and even known writers such as Masuri SN have voiced out the importance of language in their creative works. So specifically about Zakba's contributions, his advocacy is very much proven through one of his many contributions, which was the Zakba spelling system ataupun ejaan sistem ejaan Zakba. So in that era, there were inconsistencies in spelling. If we look back in history, before this specific system, there were various spelling systems which were dominated by the colonials, I would say foreigners, which were more active actually in trying to Romanized Bahasa Melayu, which then was written in Jawi, for those who may not know. So, Zakba's spelling system was actually the very first spelling system by the local, by the native, and by the Malay himself. So, this system is not currently used, but we can see that a lot of um, this system is the essence of it is still being practiced until today. So this spelling system aimed at simplifying spelling rules, unifying the variants in the region, and also this system prioritizes spelling based on pronunciation. So we will see later how it works. So going back to simplifying spelling rules, this system is definitely more phonetic and definitely aimed at Bahasa Melayu being more intuitive to be written. So for example, the word dua, pray, from Arabic, is probably written in many ways. So for example, one might write it as du apostrophe a, but then in this system, in this particular system, which follows how the Malays pronounce it, so we pronounce it as doa, not dua in Arabic. So as such, we spell it intuitively as D-O-A, doa. And then also in that era where we were mostly in this region, we were separated by colonial powers. Namely, Indonesia was under the Dutch, and Singapore, Malaysia, and Brunei were under British. So we followed different writing systems. So one very small example is how the sound j is spelled. So in the British, the British way is to use the mark J, whereas for Dutch they use DJ. So if for those of you who are interested, you can look at how Bahasa Indonesia was spelled in the past. You can see how a lot of the spelling is very unique, and actually that it was following the Dutch. So this system by Zakba wanted to unify all those variants. So as such, we see how the system helped to make Malay the language more consistent and easier to follow. So one more thing that I was quite intrigued when I learned about this system is that right now, for these three words at the bottom that we currently spell as such. So for example, buruk, which means ugly, we spell as Buruk. But in Zakba spelling system, it was spelled as Burok, because um as I mentioned, the system prioritizes pronunciation so as to make the language more intuitive on how to spell Bahasa Melayu, the words in Bahasa Melayu, just listen at how it's pronounced. So even though this is currently not practiced in Bahasa Melayu of today, but we can see his efforts in making Bahasa Melayu um, mm, easier to learn, I think, for those who for foreigners, and this system definitely has its influences in our current spelling system. And but Malay language is definitely not just about spelling; it is also about cultural pride. So writers that were under Asas 50, such as the pioneer Masri SN, um there were many quotes by him that talk about the importance of language, even in sastra, even in literature, even when him as a writer documents the issues faced by by society in poetry or in prose. Bahasa Melayu was the tool for him to um, put across his perjuangan, his advocacy for the language and also the community. So one example of a quote is he mentioned that when we recognize that language is the only tool that a writer has, um, it's actually aiming to challenge the intellect or emotions of their readers. And one more quote that I also appreciate is that he mentions about how the learning or education of Malay language is inherent in our culture, and that if it's not taught early in our next generation, or even my current generation, future generations will be swept away by the tide of foreign languages and cultures. So I think when we talk about language, we can't avoid talking about sastra, about literature, because in literature, the vehicle, the mode to to talk about issues is through bahasa Melayu. So in this era, we see a lot of efforts um, to preserve the Malay language so that the future generations can easily pick up the language and preserve it for the future. Yeah. So moving on to the second era, which is a huge time frame, I think. And I think even actually if we dive deeper, we can separate it into many, many more phases. But for today, we only look at it as one phase, which is the phase of promotion. Promotion, this phase specifically was challenged by the increasing usage of English, and as such the decreasing usage of Malay, and which has resulted in the declining prestige and pragmatic value of Malay. So one of the many mindsets even till today that we have is that if I can speak English and still succeed, meaning I can get a job, I can have a living, why do I need to speak Malay? Because Malay pragmatically does not bring economical benefits. So that is one of many mindsets that we have in our community. So as such, efforts by Bulan Bahasa, Majlis Pusat, and EDN Media have solidified the position and importance of Malay language in this era. That was done through education and various programs. So one when we talk about advocacy, right, about bahasa Melayu, I think one thing that most people would think about is Bulan Bahasa. Bulan Bahasa, the Malay Language Month, it is for me, it is a very important time every year because it is where we recognize the importance of our mother tongue, our native language, our national language. So, this Bulan Bahasa, this campaign, yearly campaign, started in 1988, and actually, if we look before 1988, there was a version of it which was Bulan Bahasa Kebangsaan, the National Language Month. So before Bulan Bahasa, there was National Language Month, which encourages the use of Malay amongst all Singaporeans, regardless of race. So I think it is very interesting to see how the themes of Bulan Bahasa evolve through the years, and I think every choice of the theme would reflect the challenge of each year. So, um, one of, I mean, the themes such as use standard Malay, our language, let's use it. They reflect how the struggle was about encouraging people to speak Malay confidently and correctly. So, the emphasis wasn't just about knowing the language, but it was also about using it in daily conversations and literature. And I think when we talk about Bulan Bahasa, a lot of it involves the education. A lot of schools, a lot of students are involved. So this sort of um helped to encourage the usage of Bahasa Melayu alive through schools, cultural programs, and literature. But even with these efforts, I think there were still struggles even until now to uphold the status of Bahasa Melayu um, within the community and also in the country. Yes. Also, actually, on top of this, I think we can also see the importance of education itself, meaning as I said earlier, advocacy also happens um, beyond governmental efforts. It can also be happen amongst initiatives and businesses. And one name that we cannot not mention when you talk about education is EDN Media. I think ever since primary school until now, as an adult, this company has been running as a major source for educational materials for Bahasa Melayu. If I can remember, in schools we always see posters, standees of Malay culture. I think those were mostly from EDN Media, and in for me as a as a student back then who was really interested in writing, a lot of the Peraduan, a lot of the competitions were headed by EDN Media. And actually, it feels kind of nostalgic because I recently sent some of my students' works through EDN Media's competition. So it's really nice to see of how such advocacy efforts last until today. So if you're interested, I'm not promoting, but then if you're interested, you can see how diverse the efforts are. So through this slide itself, you can see that um if we want to have workshops for students to paint batik, they have it. If we want to bring students on visits to certain sites such as um, Kampung Lorong Bangkok, they have it. And even schools today, they can purchase exercises for karangan, for kefahaman mendengar, for listening comprehension through EDN media. So I think EDN media is a very large body which is a very important source for educational materials. By the way, I'm not promoting them, but if you're interested, you may check them out. Okay. All right. Then we come to the final phase, which is the phase that we are living now, and I would expect this phase to be a very long phase, even in the coming years, which is the evolution phase. So this evolution phase, from just now, from the very first phase, we see how Bahasa Melayu has always been in competition with Bahasa Inggeris. The competition does not get easier, it gets tougher with further declining of interest, not just proficiency, but interest towards the Malay language. So, at the same time, there is an increasing shift towards digital creation and short form content. So the efforts here in this era, we see a lot of creation of content which are relatable, not just bilingual, but they are also using this approach, which is translanguaging, using both languages at the same time at suitable times, so as to activate our innate ability to to speak in more than just one language. So, specifically in this era, we see openness, we see creativity to to make my language more attractive and relevant for the younger generation. So, when we talk about evolution, okay, we see through the years, it is a consistent trend. I'm not I won't be just if I talk about the Malay language if I don't talk about this statistic by the Banci Penduduk, which shows the decreasing decreasing trend of Malay language used at home. So a very steep decrease if we see from 1980, which almost every Malay at home speak Malay, almost everyone. But then now, and I would say 2024, 2030, it will just decrease. And this is not me being negative, but this is me acknowledging reality. So the trend will, I would say, it will continue to decrease because we are more exposed to English and so on. So we see this steep decrease from almost everyone speaking Malay at home to only 60%, which is barely more than half of the Malay population speaking Malay at home. So why I talk about this? Why do you think I talk about this trend? It's because if you know, before 2010s, there was no such thing as tuition. But in the 2010s, in 2012 specifically, there is there was Pusat Bahasa Nusa, which was made to cater tuition programs for students struggling to excel in Bahasa Melayu. So I think this in itself reflects the increasing demand for Malay tuition, which equals to increasing demand for help in their Malay. And not just about tuition, but I am also very intrigued and appreciative because if you look at their Instagram page, once again, not promoting, but if you look at their page, they have various contents on Bahasa Melayu, not just um, promoting their programs, but also to educate general audience. So if you see one such example that I'm showing in a slide right now is vocabulary. So shocking sale in Malay is jualan gempa. Flash sale is jualan kilat. So if we do not have such efforts in Instagram or in any social media as a young Malay speaker, how do we access this knowledge um, of mm, termi- terminologies in Bahasa Melayu? It is through these efforts in social media content, digital creation that we are able to look at such new knowledge. So I think this is a very important name to talk about advocacy, and they also have competitions for writing. So this is definitely an effort that has to go on to further encourage the use of Bahasa Melayu. And following that, I think Berita Harian, the only Malay language newspaper in Singapore, has also evolved. If we notice, um, from young, Berita Harian has definitely known for its formality, known for its purpose of delivering news in print and online form. But now we also have contents which are delivered through video. And not just that, but these contents are light-hearted and delivered in bahasa campur or mixed language. So I think this reflects the daily language that we use as a Malay youth, as a common Malay youth. But yet, I would like to say that they are still upholding certain standards of kemelayuan, of Malayness, of how Malay sentences should sound like. So I think this initiative has definitely helped to make contents in Malay more approachable, more accessible for the common Malay youths, which are definitely um, more inclined to speaking English. And the other initiatives that we have to talk about is the university level, at the level for um, higher learning institutes, such as NUS and NTU, um, groups such as PB MOOCs, Bisikan Pena, Kalimah Baiduri. They are actively involved in promoting the love for Malay language and literature. So the active involvement in having workshops which cater to youth in learning about sastra, they are definitely one of the names that we should mention. So talking about myself right now. I actually have 3 more minutes, but I will talk about myself right now. Okay, so I myself have a page on Instagram, which started in 2019, 5 years ago, which mainly which at that time focused on Malay grammar. But now I am starting to talk about more about culture and alternative historical narrative. So in my page, there are various forms which aim to making the language more mesra, which more accessible, more relevant through bite-sized content. So glossing through these slides, I think in my um, Instagram page, we can see a lot of content talking about linguistic and grammar of how to use certain words based on the grammar. So, for example, how to use dari and daripada, and and I and my students who I also exposed to my Instagram page also use these contents for them to easily check when to use dari and when to use daripada in their works. Mm, I also have comics in various forms to attract youths. Talking about vocabulary in the 2020 Olympic in Tokyo. Proverbs peribahasa which are now not tested in the national examination, but I try to expose in my page. And I also talk about history, diaspora, and yeah. So I'm just glossing through. Yes. So I also talk about sastra and its discourse of the issues that we face. So it's the Malay language unoriginal and the disappearance of Malay place names in Singapore. So such issues, I think, attract a lot of youths. And I also have interactive media to engage my followers on the Bahasa Melayu. So I created an IG filter to test my followers on their grammar knowledge. And personally, I also created stickers for to commemorate Bulan Bahasa, which I mentioned just now, which was when did it start? 1988. All right, and I also created a zine last year to bring up the voice of youths towards Malay language, and this year through Major Chonting, we have published a second part of this zine, which is called Kulihat Mekah dalam Beluka. This is what I'm promoting. Okay, so if you're interested, please go to our Instagram page. So talking about all of this, I think it is very important to talk about how to move forward. I think as a creator, as an educator, as someone who appreciates our language, we have to talk about how to move forward. So I think the key lies in combining the old and the new. So like in our peribahasa, yang lama dikelik, yang baharu dikendong. So we need to honor. I think Aisyah and I, we are part of Major Tonting as a new collective in sastra and bahasa realm. We should acknowledge the work of pioneers like Zakbar and Masri SN and Asas 50, while also creating space for modern advocates like us. So it's not just about preserving what we have or had, but it's also about reimagining what the Malay language can be in a modern and digital world. This means that we should continue to renew our connection with language and deepen our understanding of Bahasa Melayu, not only for the sake of tradition, but also to shape a future where Malay remains vibrant, relatable, and mesra. Thank you.
Thank you, Fadhli. That was a very insightful presentation. When you mentioned spelling systems, I got reminded of this conversation I had with my friend about the spelling of Arabic terms like inshallah, where some people use either H or Y to spell it. And we were wondering about whether there was a correct spelling or whether it was just arbitrary. But I'm glad to know that there may actually be a historical explanation behind it. Just a reminder to all our participants, if at any point in the presentation you have any burning questions for our speakers, do make use of the QR code at the top right hand corner of the screen to access our Slido, and we'll keep them for our Q&A session at the end. Our next speaker is none other than Aisyah Lyana. Active in the Malay literature scene, she is an award-winning writer and poet who won first prize at the National Poetry Competition in 2024 and 2020, and Hadiah Sulam Kalam 2021, among others. And she also won special prizes at the Berita Harian Poetry Writing Contest in 2024 and Golden Point Awards. She also co-founded not one but two youth literary collectives in Singapore, which is Kelana Pantun Temasek in 2017 and Major Chonting in 2024. Hearsay, she is also a panelist in the upcoming Singapore's Writer Festival in a panel called Grounds in Drought, where she will be speaking about the Malay literary arts landscape today. That will also be moderated by one of our speakers today. But let us now invite Aisyah to share more about the Malay literature scene. Aisyah, please.
and also Fadhli for the really insightful presentation, because I also learned a lot from that, historical development of the Malay language. So for my section right now, I'll be talking more a bit about Malay literature and advocacy in Singapore. And how I am going to present is I'll be breaking into three different segments. So the first part is about what advocacy means to me, and why it's important to advocate for Malay literature in particular. And then on top of that, the next part is about challenges in advocacy. And the final part is more about my own personal experience when I'm building my own advocacy groups. Yeah. So okay, so what is advocacy to me? So it's about preserving, promoting, and evolving the use of Malay language and the development of its literary tradition. So similar to what Fadli has shared earlier about preserving, promoting, and evolving, instead of using that lens in terms of a historical approach, I'm trying to reframe my presentation in terms of these three pillars, and how this advocacy helps to, preserve, promote, and evolve the literature itself. Yeah. So this form of advocacy is driven by the recognition that the Malay language and literature are critical to our cultural identity, social cohesion, and historical continuity. Oops. Sorry. Okay. So again, these three pillars, why this advocacy matters. The first one about preservation. I think the first part is about cultural continuity and community empowerment. So when we preserve our literature, we honor the past, like what Fadli has mentioned. We honor past advocacy groups like Asas 50, ada 4 PM, and Zaba also. So all these pioneers are things that we acknowledge their wisdom, and then we also want to uh, preserve the values that are embedded in these cultural narratives. Yeah, so that's for the first part about preservation. And then in terms of promotion, I think it's important for us to promote our voices, because in Malay literature is where you represent Malay voices, experiences, and worldviews also. I don't know why I'm shaking. But yeah, in terms of promoting Malay voices, we ensure that our stories are visible, it is heard, and is also valued in, in a space where there are a lot more dominant languages that, often overshadow others, and languages like the Malay language. And so by promoting Malay literature, we are creating more space for authentic representation of Malay voices in our society. Yeah. And then for the third part, evolution. So tool for, I consider evolution for Malay literature as, having literature as a tool for reinterpretation and also revitalization of language. Yep. Okay. Okay, so for the first part about preservation, I think language and literature are essential components of our Malay cultural identity and heritage. So, in order to prevent the erosion of heritage, we need both of these components. And on top of that, it also is important in building our cultural pride and identity, because a lot of younger generations may feel detached from the Malay language and also heritage. And based on, what Fali shared just now about the statistics of people using Malay at home, it's just been decreasing, and I am personally worried for, my future generations, how they might the challenges they might face when it comes to the Malay language. Yeah. So um, yeah. So for preservation, it's not just also about protecting the past. As I mentioned, it's about building the cultural pride. So when we engage with our literature, we connect with like struggles or joys and the histories of our ancestors, and we strengthen our sense of self and belonging within our communities. So by preserving our heritage, literary heritage, we empower not just individuals but also like entire communities. So over here, I have listed some current ground-up literary initiatives that's advocating for continuity of Malay literature. So when the ones I mentioned here are like Pantun. So it's like my group, Kelana Pantun Temasek. There's also Pantunism. There's also Syair, which is like narrative quatrains. And this is an effort advocated by Syair Pura. There's also Bangsawan, which is a form of Malay opera. And right now, the most active in the scene seems to be Anggrek Temasek Bangsawan. And yeah, we also have Puisi and Cerpen, which is also by Major Chunting and other advocacy groups that I've mentioned. So something interesting about these advocacy groups is that it was built quite recently, maybe in the past 8 to 10 years ago, around 2016 to 2017. And I think perhaps it could be because there is a consciousness or there's a revitalization of traditional heritage, traditional literary heritage. So the traditional forms of literature like pantun and all that, this has been talked about a lot, on major platforms. So because of that, individuals felt compelled to gather friends to create these initiatives together. Yeah. Okay, so the next part is about promotion of Malay language and Malay literature. So when we talk about promotion, as I mentioned earlier, it's about having a voice, amplifying our Malay experience, our voice and worldview. So there's a typo here, but literature actually reflects the social, cultural, historical context of our society. And when we share our stories, we contribute to a richer understanding of who we are and beyond stereotypes or simplified narratives or the dominant narratives that are out there. So when we are promoting Malay literature, I think that we are also challenging language marginalization in favor of that is always in favor of more dominant languages like English. And at the same time, we are also challenging literary exclusion from local and global narratives. So I think some trends that I've observed so far in terms of promoting Malay writers, language and literature would be things like having competitions and interactive workshops to seek emerging talents. These are not unique to the current era. Of course, it has evolved and it has continued from the past. But I think it's important to comment on these competitions. So, example, Golden Point Award has started from quite a while back, and it's organized by National Arts Council once every 2 years. For me, I've also attended Mencari Crystal, which is a short story writing competition that was organized by Berita Harian. And I think if I could share a bit more about my own experience at Mencari Crystal, I think it was a really, really great initiative by Berita Harian to collate a group of writers. So how it worked was you submit your short story to the competition, and then afterwards, if you're selected in the top 35, you get the chance and opportunity to go for literary workshops with other writers. So over there, I met many different writers. I was one of the youngest. So it was really nice to listen from the tenured writers about their experience, the kind of things that they write about. And from there, I made friends who were also interested in advocating for Malay literature. Yeah. Other trends that I've observed would be about creating digital and also physical spaces for the Malay writers to publish, to perform, and also discuss our works. So, an example would definitely be Unggun Creative, which is a publishing company in Singapore, pioneered by Dr. Norida and Farihan, who is also my mentor. So, they are really pioneers in this. Not really pioneers. They are really um, good at um, advocating for spaces like this, because not only do they print uh, literary works, they collate and uh, they collate writers, and also um, try to seek emerging talent from their monthly competitions. Yeah. So that's one. And then, of course, there is like Sahabat Sastra, which is an initiative by National Heritage Board, if I'm not wrong. So it's a platform for youths in higher institutions to come together and promote literature in terms of not just writing, but also critiquing and being um, critical advocates for literature in general. Yeah. So I think one thing I want to point out also is on Maktaba books. It's a recent initiative, ground up initiative, done by 3 individuals, but I think it's interesting because they are exchanging. They are having this peer to peer exchange of books, and it's not just um, Muslim books. They hope to evolve into Malay literature soon as well. Yeah, and there's also Majlis Sastra Asia Tenggara, which is the Sastra Mastra. So this is a really interesting platform where Singaporean delegates can get to travel to Malaysia or Brunei or Indonesia to meet other uh, emerging talents in those countries, and try to, you know, try to promote and advocate for literature together as a whole. Yeah. And yeah, finally, it's about creating inclusive and accessible spaces for others to engage with Malay literature. So I think one that I can think of would definitely be NLB's Gig Puisi. It's a bit more accessible for people to come and watch and be a passive participant rather than actively, uh, deklamasi saja, or yeah, or anything else. Yeah, and they also have like a Malay library service where you can access Malay literature much more easily over there. Yeah. Okay, so in terms of evolving, I think that literature isn't static. It's a living, breathing form of expression. So we need to see it as a tool for reinterpretation of dominant narratives, as I mentioned, and also a way to revitalize language. So, sorry. So an example would be arwah Muhammad Latif Muhammad's Raung Singa, on this poster that I have here. He wrote about Sang Nila Utama and like other works in sejarah Melayu, but instead of taking it in as it is, he has a spin to it, and he critiques these narratives. So, in a sense, he is evolving literature and trying to present his own alternative perspective to literature. I mean, to what he is facing as a Malay person himself. Yep. So, in terms of evolving, it's also about exploring new themes, using modern slang, mixing languages to innovate and also adapt the language to fit to contemporary context, and basically just ensuring that it's vibrant, and it's also capable of conveying modern realities today, so that it's a bit more appealing to our younger audiences. So in terms of trends for evolving Malay literature, I think right now there is a shift towards formalizing mentorships to emerging writers, such that they can gain knowledge from the more senior writers, and also to bridge that knowledge gaps from there. And then there's also institutionalized support for translation efforts. So I think Singapore Book Council, on the top right, there's uh, my mentor there, Farihan. And then yeah, on the left, that's me. But I was just a mentor for Sahabat Sastra a few years ago for Pantun. Yep. But yes, I was talking about translation efforts. I think Singapore Book Council has wrapped up a lot of translation efforts so far. National Arts Council also, as we can see from Golden Point Award, they have a new category solely for translation, and there's a translation tool called the SG Translate Together app, not app, but a tool that is used by MCI. So all of these translation efforts show that there is a trend for Malay literature or Malay language to evolve and be present or be more accessible to other wider audiences. Yep. And finally, I think also there is a trend in which there is adapting literary text to various art forms to appeal to wider audiences. So, for instance, down here you can see cerita pendek audio. So, cerpen or short stories, which are typically text-based, has evolved into a podcast series, or even things on a play, such as Tiket Pulang over here. Yeah, so these are really interesting trends that I'm seeing for Malay literature. Yeah. Okay, so in terms of challenges in advocacy, I have four. The first one definitely goes without saying, which is declining interest among the community. So as English is more dominant as the lingua franca, it marginalizes our Malay language and literature, which is, as mentioned also just now, it may not be seen as economically advantageous or even socially advantageous to learn or appreciate. Yep. And on top of that, I think there is perceived irrelevance in terms of understanding what is sastra or knowing even what that term means. So when we talk about Malay sastra, I think in the layman term, um, I've seen an interview where someone was asking, someone was asked, what do you think of Malay sastra? And the response was, oh, I think it's about hang tua and all that, which is not relevant to us today. So I think there is maybe a gap in understanding what sastra is, because Malay literature is not just about things in the past, it's about what's happening today, and it's about how we can adapt those contemporary issues into our language when we are writing stories for our community. Yeah. So in terms of this perceived irrelevance, it has also become more difficult to engage younger generations in appreciating or even participating in Malay literary activities. So the second challenge is accessibility of Malay works. So I think there has been limited translation efforts so far, which also limits the potential for Malay literary works to gain recognition beyond the Malay speaking community. Or in fact, it's not even just beyond the Malay speaking community, it's beyond the people who speak Malay but not at a literary level. Yeah. So again, it's more of like spreading this really great works beyond that literary circle. Yeah. And there's also a lack of cross-cultural engagement which leads to cultural and linguistic gaps for non-Malay speakers. Yeah. And the second part is about the lack of visibility. So I think that writers like myself, maybe we have the ability to write, but we lack other skills such as maybe I'm talking about myself, marketing my works or like personal branding, which is just beyond the literary circle. So if I leave the Malay literary circle and go to another ethnic group circle, like they might not know me, and it's because I probably have not done enough uh, to up my game for personal branding. Yeah. So there's also a lack of digital presence to for Malay writers and their literary works as well. Yeah. Okay. So the third and fourth challenges is more about the advocacy groups itself. For the third part, I think that there are some fragmented advocacy efforts because there are limited efforts across organizations. So advocacy groups tend to work independently and with limited collaboration between institutions or grassroots or digital platforms. So when there is a lot of ground up initiatives but no sole person or agency that is coordinating all of this, it reduces the overall impact of advocacy initiatives. Yeah, because the reach is simply maybe not wide enough. Yep. And then the second point, I think it's also important to raise is that there I observe that there are tensions between tenured and also emerging advocates or writers. So I think after speaking to many more senior writers, I think what they are more worried about is that they're worried that the emerging ones are not doing enough research, they're not reading up enough, and they just want to do their own thing, which is different from our advocacy efforts. So um, that's why I think when it comes to advocacy groups, we are evolving from what is already preserved. Yeah. So at the same time, I think that instead of having tensions, perhaps we could um, we could you know talk things out, or like we could just have a more open discussion about how to constructively advocate like Malay language and literature together, because in the end we are doing this for the community. Yeah. Okay, and finally, for the challenges in advocacy, I think there's a limited institutional support, resources, and funding. So when there's and solo advocacy groups, we lack the knowledge to write grant proposals or even assess fundings for our own individual projects. So when there's insufficient funding, it leads to a difficulty in sustaining long-term projects that are effective in the long run. So other things would be volunteer burnout, because a lot of Malay language literature advocates, we do this as a passion project while balancing everything else like school, work, and other personal commitments. So it may be unsustainable over the years. And I think I'm seeing this myself because um, because as someone who started like a youth initiative, we also grow, and we also grow out of certain phases such as school, and then afterwards such as the early careers and so on. So this is a, I guess, challenge that I see, and perhaps there's also a lack of individual recognition because of this voluntary aspect of advocating. Yeah. So um, sorry, it's not ready. Okay. So in terms of the last part of my segment, I'm sorry, it's about making Malay traditional literature less intimidating and more accessible. So this is where I'll just be sharing a bit more about Kelana Pantun Temasek, KPT, which is a group that I co-founded in 2017, as well as a bit about Meja Chonting, which we co-founded together with Fadhli and Hidayat earlier this year. So in terms of KPT, I'll frame it into preserving promoting as well as evolving. So how we came about was we all met at a pantun competition, and we and in participating in pantun competitions, I think we are also preserving the traditional art form of pantun by first gaining knowledge and then practicing and improving our skills. I really enjoyed during pantun competitions because that was where we met so much and we practiced writing pantun under 1 minute or 2 minute. Almost, I don't know, almost every week we would meet for this competition. So it was a really interesting time. So in terms of preserving pantun, not just competitions, but over here you see that the four of us were selected to go to Brunei to learn a bit more about pantun from people from Indonesia, Malaysia, as well as Brunei. So there's another art form called mukun, which is something like dance and song while rhyming. Yeah, so it was something really interesting, and we were preserving pantun by understanding how pantun can evolve to another art form such as mukun. Yeah, another part about preserving pantun is, of course, we had pantun workshops. So this is how we preserve pantun with the Malay community. We have online workshops during COVID, such as this, Abang Saya Tertarik Padamu. We also had, we also attended a workshop, Pantun Pit Stop at I think the National Museum. Yeah, it was really interesting, and our group just went down to support because even though it was not us, organizing, we wanted to participate and wanted to also observe how different groups enjoy pantun or teach pantun. Yep. And we have also been doing workshops with different bodies, different museums, and community centers. So in terms of promoting pantun, it's interesting because we have done workshops where there's pantun in English, and we received a lot more reception to when we are doing pantun in English. So um, for instance, we have Once Upon a Rhyme, we had Places and Spaces, and then we also had down here a scrapbooking making session while learning about pantun. Yeah, so these were interesting things that we did. We also had poetry in Ideal Fitri to share pantun and Malay poems to non-Malay audiences such as like foreign expats. Yeah. In terms of outreach and promoting pantun, we share on social media, and these are some of our efforts, such as creating a space for people to submit their pantun to us, and then afterwards we display it on our Instagram page. And we also had some series such as the Siri Kosakata. So we not only share pantun, but we share vocabulary that students or people can use when they want to make pantun. And we also share a bit about etiquette because that comes when we are learning pantun as an art form. Okay, evolving pantun. Of course, as we know, pantun is an oral tradition. It can also be a text-based kind of form, but for KBT, what we've tried to do is we've evolved pantun through songs, dance, and also different art forms. So up here, you can see we managed to do a performance with arwah Pak Suratman's penghulu di Kota Batu. Yeah, village chief in the concrete jungle. So we adapted his script, and then we input some pantun at relevant parts, and we performed it as a as a performance. Okay, last few slides, I promise. Okay, and I think this is the last for KPT, evolving pantun. So we gamify pantun so that it's a bit more accessible to youths and children. and students. So we had things like Pantu Night where we did with university groups. We also had Read Between Rhymes, which we did with Singapore Writers Festival last year, and we made this into a game form. And so people were just scanning QR codes around the arts house, like a puzzle hunt. And we also had over here a few issues such as kawin lambat, teknologi terkini, selera makan, which are issues that we talk about today, but we tried to make it into a pantun form for audience. Yeah. Okay, and next about Major Chonting is something that we've just created this year with Hidayat and Fadhli. So when we first came together to create Major Chonting, we wanted to pull in together all the different young writers in Singapore, because we also know that writing can be a very solitary activity, and sometimes you just need a community. So that was why we pulled in together people who had the same interests, and yeah, from there we managed to publish a zine, which is over here, Kulihat Mekah Dalam Beluka. And on top of that, we are going to do a poetry conference next week. And yeah, the Major Chonting Instagram page is also there to promote other achievements by our members. So it's, I would say, another form of advocating Malay literary figures, the young ones in our society. Yep. And yeah, so I think just some closing words. Preserving our heritage, um, promoting no, it's loading. Promoting our voices and evolving our literature. These are all interconnected efforts which ensure that Malay language and literature remain vital and relevant. So even though just now I talk about advocacy groups and I frame that in certain boxes, I think I want to emphasize that everything is interconnected. And also, by doing so, we not only protect our identity, our Malay identity, we also empower our Malay communities, and we open up new possibilities for future generations. So ultimately, by embracing these three pillars, which is preserving, promoting, and evolving, we are not just keeping our Malay literature alive. We are actively shaping it into a powerful tool for cultural expression, community empowerment, and also hopefully social change. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Aisyah, for that enlightening presentation and for sharing your observations on trends with regards to the Malay literature scene. You've shared so many good works and resources by the Malay language and literature community. But unfortunately, that concludes the presentation segments of this webinar. And now we've come to the Q&A segment of the night, where you are able to engage with our speakers and hear more insights from them. And I'm seeing so many good questions streaming to Slido and even our Facebook and YouTube comments. So the first question that we have is, okay, if I may read it out. Social justice issues seem to be attractive and trending among youths today. Do you think that there is room for Malay language advocates and cultural practitioners to promote the development and appreciation for the Malay language by capitalizing on these trends? And have you seen any successful examples? This is open to the floor.
Okay, I think when we talk about bahasa Melayu, um, climate issues, sustainability, gender justice, I think um, it is very it is right for us to say that bahasa Melayu is very much intertwined with these issues already. When we talk about climate change, when we talk about sustainability, we know that this once upon a time the Malay community was very close to nature, and even now when we talk about orang laut, orang pulau, they were very much close to the nature and and have a lot of terms and words that are specific to their community. So I think it is very, very much importance for us to uh, create space to talk about these issues in Bahasa Melayu, because I think when we speak about an issue in a particular language, there will be a very nuanced expression through that language itself, which comes beautifully for the language to evolve. And I think personally, from my observations, also as an educator, Bahasa Melayu is often um, used to talk about issues which are more centered through on culture and family. But then beyond those two realms, not much or not enough spaces are created for us to talk about these issues. So one one successful attempt that I see, and when I heard this question, one name that came to mind is 4 PM, Bahas 4 PM, where it is a form of debate, which is a very well-known group, and like EDN Media, like every other tenured groups, 4 PM has been there for the longest time I've known, to have a space for issues such as climate change, gender justice, to be discussed in a space where Bahasa Melayu is used.
Yeah, I second Fadli's opinions, and I think when we are talking about maybe competitions, we can see the themes are also very contemporary, and they reflect on what is happening today. So when there's, for example, DK competition or Pesta Pantun competitions, they make it a point to relate it to what's happening today and make it relevant. So example of so these competitions are examples of where um, people who might want to try and start out be involved in discussions related to social justice. Yep.
I think I also like to add on the gender justice. I was recently invited to attend Mastra, like what Aisyah shared, where we could meet emerging writers from other regions. So I met this one writer. Her name is Altami Andy, and her novel was titled Penaka, Penaka, which means in Malay would be like umpama or ibarat. So it's um, comparing one item to another item. So this novel talks about females, wives in a family of violence, of injustice, and but then this particular character suddenly evolved into a water bottle, into a chair, into a fly, and the perspective is that we as readers are brought to through this novel is very interesting, to see how the perspectives of female, of wives which are in I would say violent setting of violent um, marriage, see how the world is like. So it's very interesting to see our neighboring countries, neighboring writers engage issues which I would say hard to talk about in a form which is creative, but yet still the message is very successfully brought to the readers. So I think we should really write like that, Aisha.
Looking forward to such works. What I'm getting is that the discussion of these trends manifest in different forms, so we just have to keep a lookout for it. Okay, moving on to the second question, quite heavy as well. You have discussed a lot of efforts by youth and efforts by the past generations. But can you also comment on whether we have done enough to preserve, sustain, and allow for evolution of our language and literature? Or do you see a deeper problem in why we are still facing what we are facing today?
I think from the language side, um, we have seen a lot of efforts, be it on the individual level or the collective level, but I think the problem still lies in the systemic issues, which results in Malay language being falsely perceived as not beneficial. I once, in my zine Kuliah Layu Dalam Melayu, there was a quote that I quoted, but currently I can't recall it was by who. But the quote mentions that when we talk about language, language is not only about its economic value; it is beyond that. So when you talk about learning a language, it won't guarantee you economic stability, but the growth that you go through by learning the language comes the culture, comes the values, comes the budi, comes the budi bicara, and everything that is invaluable, or you can't measure its value through economic terms, but our perceptions should change. And one more issue in the system that I think um, enables the Malay speakers to escape from learning Malay is on how when a student progresses from secondary school, then they can go to poly, they can go to JC, IT, and every other pathways. But then the mother aspect is 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 being put away as if it is just a hurdle for them to go through. So I think I acknowledge all these efforts, but then the issue still lies in the bigger picture.
Yep. I wanted to add on. I mean, because the question is similar to the challenges that I mentioned just now about fragmented advocacy efforts throughout different advocacy initiatives. So I think whether it's enough or not, it may be subjective depending on what you're trying to look out for. Is there enough competitions? Is there enough pelapis people to take over? So it's subjective in that sense. But I think in terms of solutions or moving forward, I think it's important to strengthen our literary ecosystem. So just as gardens like need different elements like plants, soil, sunlight, water, a literary ecosystem also needs a variety of elements such as readers, writers, editors, publishers, critics. Those are important. And also we need the institutions coming in such as the cultural institutions, translators, as well as multidisciplinary artists, and of course the platforms for discussion. So yeah, so that's what I think. Moving from whether it's enough or not, but together let's build a stronger literary ecosystem. Yeah.
Okay. Um, we have another question from our Slido. It says, thank you to the panel for the wonderful discourse. Is accessibility more important than form? So, akses kepada masyarakat or more important than bentuk and quality of sastra? And also, while emerging advocates do need to read up on past literary works, isn't it also important for tenured advocates to share in the vision for the future Malay language and literature? Any comments on that? Perhaps Aisyah, you want to take the
Yeah.
first question? Thank
Yeah.
you.
I think in terms of accessibility of form, accessibility is more important because when you have people assessing the Malay literature, that's where you can expose them to other different forms. So having the Malay literature, or people who are not, previously not interested, to come into that sphere first and learning about what there is to learn. I think that's more important. So in doing so, for example, how we can do so is to leverage on digital platforms like what Fadhli shared, having bite-sized content. And also for the second part of the question was, sorry, I missed that. Oh, about whether senior writers should share their innovation, right? Okay. Definitely, I think it's something that should be mutually. It's a mutual collaboration between those tenured writers as well as emerging writers. As much as we have to read up on past works, I think senior writers can also share about what they hope Malay literature can evolve into in the future. Yeah, so it goes both ways, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about advocacy efforts in Singapore pertaining to bahasa and also sastra Melayu, it is not. I mean, it's known and it's evident that these efforts are often fragmented. They normally work in silos and they don't always work together. So I think as Major thing individually, I think Aisyah, me, and other writers under Major thing, we are also actively engaging the tenured writers, those we respect and we should acknowledge their contributions in the sastra world. Definitely we should learn, we have to learn more from them in terms of how our vision, ours and theirs, can align, so that we can make it possible in our time.
Okay, so I'm getting that there should be collaborative effort amongst all and to build on the ecosystem that Aisha mentioned because everything is ultimately interconnected. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up the Q&A session. We really want to ask more questions. But maybe Major Chonteng can do a Q&A session in the future to address all these good questions. Uh, yeah. So we have come to the end of this webinar. Thank you so much for sticking with us till the end. And don't forget to fill in our feedback form that can be found on the screen. The QR can be found on the right side of the screen. And on the left are our socials that you can follow for more updates of our future events. Any last words or pantons from anybody? Uh, if not, I have one. Menyusun pantun, okay, nobody asked but I'm going to say anyway. Menyusun pantun memakai rima. Rima dibuat menjadi kisah. Sudah sejam kita bersama, tibalah masa untuk berpisah. Thank you all. Selamat malam and good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
If Aisha and Fadli wants to fill in the feedback form, please go ahead.